Well, who walked by? Who walked by but Idris? And Idris was a merchant, and he was a fine man. And just the week before, he had married the most lovely of women. Well, he went home, and there she was, Sumaya, his wife, young, beautiful. And he looked at her, and he was in love with her. She was the best thing that had ever happened to him in his life, despite his wealth as a merchant. And he looked at her, and he thought, what more could I wish than a wife like this? And he looked at her and says, I wish that you will always stay as young and beautiful as you are. Well, a period of time went by, and they were happy, and she stayed as young and beautiful as she was. But after several years, they had children, and the children grew older. And she stayed as young and beautiful as she was, and he grew older. And the children grew older, and before long the children were as old as she was, and she stayed as young and beautiful as she had always been. And he grew to be an old man with gray hair, and the children grew over her and grew older than her, and still she was as young and beautiful as she had always been. And she was a thing, almost treated as a thing that no one knew what to do with, because she was still, even though she loved her husband and he loved her, they realized that staying young and beautiful and wanting to stay always as you were was only a curse. So he opened up that ring. He opened up that package. And he took that ring off his finger and he put it in that package. And he says, do not wish for everlasting youth and beauty, because they will not make you happy either. Well, he wrapped up that ring. And he sent one of his servants out into the desert. And there, on a rock in the desert, he left that ring. Way out in the desert. But who had been watching but Dhul Bassa? Dhul Bassa was the terror of the desert. And he had been watching someone put something on that stone. And when that person had left, Dhul Bassa came out of the shadows of the rocks. And he walked up to that rock and he picked up that package and opened it. And there was a ring. Now Dhul Bassa was the terror. He was the robber of all of that part of Egypt. And he looked at that ring and he says, now I can be the greatest of robbers of all time. Here is a ring which will make it possible. For years I have robbed every place in this land. Now I can rob the places where no one can go. I wish to be invisible. Well, there he was, invisible. But he did not know if he was invisible yet. So he went to the nearest village. And he walked in, and he walked into the potter's shop. And the potter's shop had just closed up. And he opened the door. And as he opened that door, there was the potter with his two wives sitting at the table. And he walked up to a shelf full of pottery, and he knocked it, and it flew all over the room. And he said, what happened? What is this? And his wife, the potter, jumped up with his wives and looked around, and they did not see anybody. And Dhul Bassa realized they could not see him. So he ran around that potter's shop, and he took and he stole and he rampaged around, and he took gold coins and he dropped them down the backs of the dresses of his wives, and he pinched them and he pulled at their hair and he pulled off their scarves, and no one could see him. And so he went around the city of Port Said all night. And he played pranks on this one, and he stole that one, and he did this and he did that, until there was a terror all over the city as no one had ever known before. But the very next morning, even the greatest of terror wears off, and the fun of it wears off. So he got tired and he wanted to go home. So Dhul Bassa went back to his own home in the desert. And there as he walked in, he called out, "Food, my wife! Food, please!" And his wife took one look and his servant took one look. And they did not see anything but a voice coming out of so nowhere. And they thought jinns had come into the house, and they thought to run for their lives. And they left that house, and there he was, no food, all by himself. And he called out, "Please come back, please come back." And it terrified him only more. And then he says, "But I don't wish to be all the time invisible." And then he realized what it said on the parchment of the ring. a wish he made was irrevocable. And he realized that he had gone too fast and too far. And from that day on, even the fun of being a robber went out of his life, because what fun is it if no one can see you and you can do anything you want? So from that day on, Dhul Basa became a wandering shadow in the deserts of Egypt, and no one has heard from him since. And he took that ring off, and he wrote on that parchment to fulfill his duty to the ring, and wrote, "Do not wish to be invisible either." And he wrapped up that ring, and he took that ring, and he threw it over a wall in the city of Port Said. And there it landed in a garden, in the garden of Hama ibn Subira. Now Hama ibn Subira was a pious man. He was a good man, and every day he would go to the mosque, and he would make his 5 prayers, and he would come back, and he would go to the mosque. But always he wished that the mosque they had was a little bigger or a little more beautiful. As he looked around it. So now he found this ring, and he opened it and he looked at it. And there, as he saw that ring, and he saw that he had a wish which would be fulfilled, and he looked around him at the city, and he looked around him at the mosques of the city, he realized that the city did not have one wonderful mosque which is greater than any mosque in any other city. And he thought, I wish we had a mosque with a greater and more beautiful minaret than any city in the world. Well, suddenly, there in the city arose the most beautiful mosque with the greatest minaret in all of the world. And Hama ibn Subira went to that mosque, and he prayed in it, and he prayed in it. But still, he looked at that mosque, and then he looked at that minaret, and he said, if only I could be on that minaret. I could be closer to God every single day. And even though he prayed with the people, and he talked with the people after the prayer, and they went out and they drank coffee, he looked at that minaret and said, if only I could be closer to God on that minaret every single day. So finally he decided, and he climbed up on top of that minaret, and there he would sit and make his prayers. But then after his prayers he would have to climb down, and then climb up again, and climb down again. And after a short while it became too tiring to climb up and climb down, and climb up and climb down, and climb up and climb down. And he figured, I might as well stay up there close to the heavens. And he told his servants to bring food and put it in a basket, so he could pull it up on a rope. And from that day on he stayed on that minaret by himself. But before long, even though he stayed on that minaret, he was missing something in his prayers, because every day he would go to the mosque and he would pray with his brothers in the mosque, and he would sit there and he would talk with them, and he would be a happy man. And here he would pray by himself, and even though he was closer to the heavens than ever before, after a short while his prayers felt more empty and more empty. And he realized that even on the greatest mosque in the world, on the greatest minaret in the world, if he was not amongst his brothers praying, closeness was not really a thing that could be obtained by sitting on the highest minaret in the world. Closeness to God was not something that he could obtain by sitting on the highest minaret in the world, in the most beautiful mosque in the world. And suddenly his heart felt sad, and he came down and he prayed in the mosque where he had always been praying. And right then his heart started feeling somewhat happier, and he shook his head and realized that even his wish had not really made him happy. And he opened that parchment and he wrote on it, even the greatest mosque in the world and wishing for the greatest building in the world will not make you happy. And he wrapped up that ring, and he took it to a friend of his, Sheikh Abu Said, who lived in that same town. And as he came to the garden of Abu Said was sitting, and it was just before Maghrib prayer. And he was sitting in his garden under the trees. And he says, "Ah, my sheikh, here's the ring of 7. It is a wish ring. It can give you the greatest of wishes that you wish for in your life." And Abu Sa'id, he sat there and he looked at that ring and he read the parchment. And as he sat there, he said, "Ah, Hamad bin Subira, no mosque can give you fulfillment, but the mosque of the heart. As long as the mosque of the heart is not fulfilled, you can pray in any mosque and still be unhappy." And he sat there and he made his Maghrib prayer. And after Maghrib prayer, he looked at the ring and he looked at the parchment and he took the ring and he put it on his finger and he says, "Ah, I wish to be contented with exactly that which has been decreed for me by Allah in this life." And at that moment it looked as if the whole universe for one single instant flooded towards him, and an incredible peace came over him. And then it was over. But from that moment on he was contented, and he was the only one who did not have to regret his wish that he had made on the ring of 7.